Hello and welcome to State of the Economy. Today we have with us a special guest, Dr. Rukmini Banerji, who is a program director with Pratham. It's the largest non-governmental organization working in the space of education for children. Pratham in particular brings out an annual survey of on education, which has been coming out with education outcomes in the country, especially in government schools in rural areas. Welcome to our show, Dr. Rukmini Banerji. I would just start with a framing question, which is taking from some data from your latest report, which came last week, which shows that learning outcomes in primary schools, in government schools in rural areas, has been deteriorating very sharply. And two bits of statistics which really struck me as very rather shocking, which is that students of class 5, only 27% of students of class 5 can do subtraction, and about 17%, only 70% can do division. And there's a big fall in the number of students in class 5 who can actually read class 2nd text.
Right.
And all this is being captured by your annual survey, which is very good, which is generating a lot of debate. But why is all this happening when the government has increased spending on education by some 360% since 2005, and there's so much focus on education, right to education, all kinds of awareness programs, and yet what's going on?
If I look back to 2005, which is when we started doing these annual surveys, and look at the trends over time, and as you say, this kind of annual information is very rare.
Very rare.
So
that's why it allows for comparison. Yeah.
It allows for comparison over time. It allows you to look at changes from year to year. Very often people say, what is the need to do it annually? But when children are growing and they are in school, I think every year is really important.
You can take corrective steps if things
right,
are,
exactly. Yeah. So if I look at whether children are in school, very high enrollment numbers. Yeah. Today the number across rural India is something close to 97%. Today, which means...
what was it say 10 years ago?
It was about 92, 93% 10 years ago, and many states have been well above 95% for the last couple of years. Now that's
a positive.
Yeah, I think that in a context of India is not a mean achievement. Yeah. Not only that the levels are high, but they've been they're maintaining at a high level. And it means that more or less every child in India is in school. Of course, that last 3% is going to be difficult. These are children who are scattered and so on. Yeah. So on that side, now as part of this exercise, what we do is the main data collection is done in households.
Okay.
Because we believe that you want to take a status of education of all children in India, not any particular kind of children. And there are at least 3 kinds of children. Children who go to government schools, children who go to private schools, and children who don't go to school.
Okay. Your survey covers all 3.
Yeah, so the best place to find all 3 is at home. Yeah. So what ASER was designed to be a representative sample of children at the district level, and therefore we go there. So along with high enrollment across the board in every state, we find that the numbers of out-of-school children are reducing. Okay. Today in India, even girls in the age group of 11 to 14, almost in every state, is well below 10%, and in most states well below 5%.
Yeah, sure.
So these are all numbers that have been accumulating over the years. This is not an overnight.
In fact, even when I go to cover elections in remote villages, this is one question I ask everywhere. How many girls go to school today as opposed to how many went 15 years ago? I get a reply that maybe 15 years ago 3 out of 10, now 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10. Yeah.
The second thing is, if you look at who is attending school, you can say enrollment numbers are very high, and there too there is a big range. There are states like say UP or Bihar where the number may be between 50 and 60% of children on a random day who are in school. But there are many states where this number is well above 85%. So I think there are things that we've done right. We've built schools, we have teachers, and so on and so forth. In 2005,
we managed to get them to school.
We managed to get them to school,
that's an achievement. Yeah.
Right, and they seem to be staying in school as well.
Yeah.
So in 2005, one of the things that we were concerned about, as Pratham, we've been working with kids for a long time, and we felt that the visible changes of bringing children to school, making sure there are no out-of-school children, had actually been tackled. And it has been tackled on both sides, both by the government as well as by families. This can't happen unless the two work together.
Sure.
But the invisible problems now needed highlighting. And by invisible, I mean that if children are in school, everybody assumes they are learning, right? I mean, if in fact in many Indian languages, the word padhai and padna, you know, they are almost co-terminals, that if you're in school, you must be learning. And it's not just in our common perception. If you look at the economics literature, for many years, years of completed years of schooling was seen as a proxy for, you know, all kinds of student attainment. But in our work in Pratham, across many rural areas and cities, we could see that children were in school, but they were not quite at the level at which everybody expected them to be. And so,
and when did you first discover this?
So we've worked. Pratham was formed in '94, and we worked in Bombay, and after that worked in a number of other locations. And we knew that not only we, I think parents, teachers, all knew that things are not as good as they ought to be. Teachers have difficulty in the class, parents feel children aren't making the kind of progress they need to make, and but there was no quantification of it. There was no concreteness put on what does that actually mean. Many years ago, I joined Pratham in '96, and in '97, we did a small study, 20 schools in Bombay Municipal Corporation for 3rd and 4th standard students. And in Andheri, okay, so not in Dharavi or somewhere.
Proper urban.
And found that actually even at that time, in 3rd and 4th, kids were struggling with basics of number recognition, addition, subtraction.
So you see, even in a place like Andheri, this problem existed?
In municipal schools in Andheri.
So that means it exists in private schools also,
Probably, and there was no measurement of this on a very large scale. And so in 2005, when we began to measure it, we felt that it was important not just to look at the inputs going into school, but also at the outcomes.
So that was the first time you thought of measuring output in real terms, right?
Yeah, and there what we did is we defined it as basic reading. And so, because unless you can read,
you put down the parameters there.
We put down the parameters. Can you recognize alphabets? Can you read simple everyday words? Can you read a couple of sentences which are kind of at the end of first standard text?
And you started doing this since which year?
2005.
So this is the
first time that we did it. Yes, we did it.
Okay.
And the reasons for doing it were several. One is that the first UPA government had more or less come to power. There was a lot of talk about outlays to outcomes. Chidambaram made...
So that was the trigger. Okay.
Education cess, 2% education cess.
So a lot of funding came in. We'll take a small break here and continue our discussion. Please don't go away and stay with us. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a very interesting conversation with Dr. Rukmini Banerji, Program Director at Pratham, who has led this extensive survey of outcome learning in primary education. So Rukmini, you said that 2005 was the first year when you actually laid down the parameters for coming out of the learning outcomes, and you actually after that, year after year, you have been comparing how primary schools, especially in rural areas, are faring in learning outcomes. Now please tell us how, in light of your statistical findings, which shows that outcomes are deteriorating pretty seriously. So what are your conclusions? What is going on? Why are the outcomes declining, quality? Because one would have thought that they would, if not getting better, they would stagnate. But like your study shows, like declining by 15-20%.
See, if you look at the period 2005 to 2010, I think we can characterize that period as kind of the big stuck. This big stuck is not my.
And also, this period also, as you said, it coincides with this big thrust to education, as you said, education says, big spending in education, etc.
It matches quite well with, I think, our growth rates were going up. I think the education cess was almost unquestioned. It came into being.
A lot of new teachers, new schools, right?
And yet, this focus on outcomes was not quite there. I think there was still an understanding that more is better, more teachers, more textbooks, more years of schooling.
And all that happened.
All that was happening. You see another trend in our data as well as that parents who also want more. They want educational aspirations are rising. People are enrolling children into school at earlier and earlier. It's not uncommon to find children who are 5 or younger who are already in first standard. But the focus on outcomes was, I think, something quite new.
Learning outcomes.
Learning outcomes. And in learning outcomes, very basic things like can you read, can you recognize numbers,
can you divide, can you subtract,
you know, very, very simple things. And so I think in the first couple of years, the assessments showed that things were bad, but they were kind of not changing up to about 2010. And then we began to notice between 2010 and 11 quite a big drop, which worried us because...
Why?
Yeah, so exactly. So we were worried about, you know, did we do something differently, which we hadn't. It's a massive exercise. The sample size of ASER is well over 600,000 children, well over about 3.3 lakh households.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, the decline is quite sharp. Like class 5 students being able to read class 2 text has declined from 61% to 46%, right?
Yeah, and it varies across states, but... And the decline is visible not as dramatically, but also in private schools.
That's what interests me.
Yeah.
Because there is this great sort of belief that private schools are a solution to everything. But then that doesn't seem to be so.
That's true.
Given your data. You know?
So if you look at the ASER data, you'll see private school enrollment has been rising during this period. It was at something like 18-19% in 2005. It's close to almost 30% today.
Of the total universe of students.
Of the children who are 6 to 14 today, out of 10 kids in rural India, close to 3 go to private schools, and this number is very high in all the states going north of Delhi. If you include UP as well, this number is sometimes as close.
So you're saying the south of Vindhyas
is a little bit lower.
The government schools are working better.
ASER is a temperature. Okay, I can't tell you what is better or what is worse, but you see patterns. You see private school rising everywhere. But it's high. It's high in the northern states, it's medium in the southern states, and it's very low in the eastern states. Odisha, Bihar, Jharkhand, West Bengal.
Private schools are very low.
Has very low, but in those states you have private tuition, which is very high.
Okay.
So you have these very variegated patterns. So the question was really what was happening after 2010, and from ASER as I said is a thermometer. Yeah. So I can just tell you what the temperature is. I can't tell you, where the fever is coming from.
Yeah.
But they've been, I've been very impressed by the seriousness of the discussion, especially at the state government level.
Okay.
And there have been states which have called big meetings, called people from every district to kind of look at what the issue is. In the 2010-11 year, we thought maybe there was elections as well as census in that year, if you remember.
Okay.
And then school teachers are involved in both. So we wondered...
The absence of school teachers.
So we wondered if it was just that one particular year, and elections and census affects government schools much more than it affects private schools.
But you said private schools also showing...
They show a slight decline, much less than in government schools. But the following year we saw that again. It's only between 2012 and 13 that it seems to have stabilized, that we have bottomed out. So it's a mystery as to why this is happening. And from my own or our own experiences and other things that we know, not from ASER, one of the possible explanations could be that 2010, the Right to Education Act was passed.
Okay.
And the 2010 Act is supposed to improve and guarantee education.
Yeah.
What it does really is focus a great deal on inputs again.
Okay.
Now, does that mean that everybody is focusing only on inputs? To some extent, I think, especially the one on teachers, recruitment of teachers, the attention of a whole education machinery naturally now has to be on the fulfillment of the norms of the right to education.
Okay, so it's a quantitative
so it could be
targets.
Yeah, it could be. Now,
also here, I keep hearing from educationists that one of the problems which has occurred in the last 2-3 years post RTE, right to education, is that there is a norm that you won't fail any students until class 8. So they get automatic passage until class 8.
Now,
so could that have resulted in...
See, it's hard to tell how these kinds of laws are actually perceived all the way to the ground. But what definitely seems to have happened...
In a recent debate on Doordarshan, I heard there was an audience of common citizens. They all complained about this.
Certainly what has happened is whatever were the...
They're saying students are not studying because of this...
and parents feel it's not that important and so on. Certainly one of the things that has happened is that whatever were the assessment, and I'm not even saying exam or test, whatever were our evaluation mechanisms inside the school, even if they were internal to the school alone, have certainly loosened up because of these new kinds of perceptions as well as laws. And I think that what the old systems have been replaced by is something called continuous comprehensive evaluation. Which again in principle is a very good thing. You need to look at where your kid is at all times.
Principle is fine.
But the practice,
the implementation
may have been
a bit perverse, yeah.
May have been maybe confusing, because here I am as a teacher. I mean, if I just look at data in ASER, okay, let's say I'm a 5th standard teacher. And I personally have faith in teachers. These teachers are no better and worse than any of us, right? And I am a 5th standard teacher. So as a good 5th standard teacher in India, what do? I pick up the 5th standard textbook and start teaching it, right? But if you look at the ASER data, you can see that in 5th standard, less than half the kids are able to do 2nd standard stuff.
Okay.
So I, as a good teacher, well trained, coming every day, teaching my children, I'm teaching at a level that really misses 50% of the class for sure.
But do you get feedback from teachers that the people are missing, the students are not able to grasp class 5?
When you have, we have as Pratham a lot of experience with teachers, and they will admit that if they were, what do you do in 5th standard with a kid who is not able to read a sentence yet?
Okay, you have to fail the kid, right?
Or you have to spend a lot of extra time and a lot of extra resources on helping the kid to catch up. That kid probably comes from a household where there is nobody particularly educated at home, so there is not enough learning support. So overall, my feeling is at the perception level, there's a perception that it's okay you will go through school up to 8th standard, and that there is no need for an exam. But that doesn't mean that you can't actually help kids and assess them.
Okay.
And so I think our old system needs to be replaced by something else.
Something else. Okay. Yeah. We'll take a small break here and come back to examine what can be the new system which will help. We'll take a small break here. Please stay with us. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are talking to Dr. Rukmini Banerji, a program director at Pratham, who brings out the ASER report, annual survey of education, and she is talking about what sort of new system should come into place to replace the existing one, to improve learning outcomes. So, what are the ideas, new ideas that you have?
Okay, so before I come to my new ideas, 2 things I want to point out. That over this period of 9 years, we can see some big changes in the last year or so. So in 2010, there was a Right to Education Act, which we've already spoken about. But last year, the Planning Commission's 12th plan document, which was, I think, finally passed by the end of December.
It speaks about outcome, right?
It speaks about outcomes very clearly. And I think that's the first indication that this whole issue of outcomes is very central.
So you're saying the goalpost has shifted?
The goalpost has shifted. I mean, literally, I think what has happened is the goalpost has been shifted. Now our whole game has to shift to have goals going.
So how does the game adjust to the new goalpost?
So then, if I look at indications of whether the game is changing, it's still at the policy level. Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan every year puts out guidelines to all states and districts to form what they call the annual work plan. That's how every district makes their plan, and that's how, whatever needs to happen in the district. This year, 2014-15's Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan guidelines also have learning outcomes quite centrally.
Okay.
And I think this is a very major shift, because this signals to state governments, to districts, that now it is important. And what they are.
Do you find that some state governments are more receptive to the new system than the others?
So I would say that this realization that outcomes are important has been rising, not just in India, but internationally as well. And the reason it has been rising, I think there have been different kinds of measurement. So there are states in India like Gujarat, like Rajasthan, who've already been measuring to see, partly in reaction to the ASER report, partly in reaction to their own perceptions. Gujarat has been.
I'm surprised even Gujarat shows 5th class students very poor at division.
And the good thing about Gujarat is they've been doing this measurement now for quite some time. So they have their own internal data which also indicates that work is needed. Bihar, for example, is a state that has been very seriously focused on education. They had a very big backlog. I mean, they had many things that needed.
And Nitish Kumar appointed a lot of temporary teachers in the last 4-5 years.
No, they built buildings, they were temporary teachers, they've done many things. But they too, along with all the things on the access side, have understood the importance of learning out.
Here, tell me, I have always heard from people that Bihari kids are very highly numerate. Their mathematics is much better than others. Is that borne out by data?
It is. If you look at there is I have to make a small admission. I'm from Bihar myself. And so whenever I talk about Bihar, I feel a little self-conscious. But the Bihar's math numbers, even in ASER, look quite different from what you would think Bihar's numbers would look like.
Okay.
And what is the reason for this, I really don't know. But if you go to, I'm sure you travel, if you go to Bihar, go to any village.
I've been to Bihar, I've been to Nalanda, etc.
Ask kids to tell you.
I've seen kids reciting tables of 13, you know.
Yeah.
School kids.
Not only that, they can recite tables of adai, ded, things like this.
So that's a decimal point, right? Yeah.
Fraction. So there is a culture of, I think, maths. Nitish Kumar
so is it borne out in the outcome?
You can see that, yes. But it's still much lower than it ought to be. Yeah. But Bihar's math numbers are a lot higher than, you know, Maharashtra or Gujarat. Or
in fact, I'm told that there's a finishing school, IIT finishing school run by some ex-bureaucrat, which shows 100% results.
Yes,
like 50 people come there and 50 join IIT, you know.
But what we need is for all children.
I know that it's that becomes a slightly exclusive. We're going to exclusive domain. Yeah. Now, but tell me, I'm really sort of worried about another aspect. I have data again from your report, which shows that government is actually allocating per student some twice or three times the amount actually being spent on students per capita per year. I'm told that 2,000 rupees is what is spent by the government per year per student, but the allocation is more than twice that.
See, much of...
And you're returning the money to the government, is that?
Much of the expenditure per capita on children actually is teacher salaries, right? And now the more and more trained, highly trained teachers that you bring in, these teacher salaries will remain quite high. In private schools, on the other hand, where private schools don't follow many of these norms, the per capita expenditure is lower because your teacher salaries are much lower. Now, if you look at...
I would have thought that private schools would be higher teacher salaries.
No, because private school teachers are, in fact, government school teachers are paid much more. Even your contract teachers in government schools are often paid more than private school teachers. Are you
satisfied with the quality of teaching?
I would say that we are not satisfied with not just the quality of teaching, but the way teaching and learning is organized in our system. So, like I said, we are very, as a system, whether it is private or government.
You have to change the entire method of pedagogy or something? Is that what you're suggesting?
What I'm suggesting is that how can you teach at any level, whether it's university or first standard, how can you teach to a class where what you are teaching is missing most of the children?
So, you're saying that we need to fundamentally change the way we teach?
We fundamentally need to put children at the center of it and say that let's start where the child is and move upwards from there. Rather than, I would say, if I had to put it very simply, Rukmini Banerji, who is an economist at MIT, he says it very well. He says, we teach the syllabus, we don't teach the children.
Okay.
And so I think that's one of the...
I read an article by him right. He and Esther Duflo, where he visited one school where Pratham had also interacted with, and he presented a pretty dismal picture of...
so the other aspect of, I mean, I think it's a connected one. There is a paper, another really very interesting paper by another economist called Land Pritchett, who calls it the negative consequences of over-ambitious curriculum. So if your curriculum or syllabus is moving very fast, but it's leaving behind more and more of the children, I don't think there's anything wrong with Indian children. I think there
so you're just basically you're on your own trip rather than looking at the kids.
And so we need to, I think, reorganize. I don't think these are major. As soon as you set a learning goal, as soon as you say that by the end of second standard, take 2 years, most children should be able to read 4 sentences. They should be able to speak their mind. They should be able to solve a simple problem.
Are you discussing all this with policymakers at the state government center?
We discuss this with anybody who will talk to us, and I'm so happy that somebody like you on a program like this is talking about it, because I think it affects everyone. It affects us today, it affects our future, and I think what we are suggesting is start where the kids are and move with them. And we've seen that this is possible within government systems. Bihar, for example, has taken on this approach of actually grouping kids by level rather than by grade, and is trying to do it this year system-wide. So these kinds of things.
So you're saying that many states are responding to the situation, trying to change the method of teaching and
I'm hopeful that with this change in the policy environment, with the change in the signals that are being given out, more and more states will actually look at where their kids are today and where they want them to be 2 years from today or 3 years from today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rukmini Banerji. That's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back with you next week. Thanks for watching.